So let's get started. Oh, it's Jane. Yay!
Okay.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Duke Disability Alliance meeting as always. Today is a special meeting because we're going to be hearing from all 4 young trustee candidates. That's Trey Walk, Brian Burr, Luke Farrell, and Archana Alawat. But before they get here, I scheduled some time for us to just go through introductions, hi to the new faces, and also task force updates because we established this last week. So yeah, so icebreaker, how was your past week and what's one thing you're looking forward to this week? So I'll start. My name is Deepti. I'm a junior. I'm the president of DDA, and this past week was pretty nice, pretty basketball heavy because I'm black tenting, so I went to the Boston College game, and then trivia was interesting. I asked me who the Duke MVP tournament players were, and now I know. And then this coming week should be nice, more relaxing because tenting is finally dying down.
Sounds like a great week. So my name is Kevin. I'm a junior from Florida. I am very excited this week. My partner is coming on Friday from Milwaukee. She's a teacher. And so she's flying down, and I'm very excited to have the long 3-day weekend with her. Yeah, be able to show her Duke a little bit. So.
You should bring her here.
Maybe. That'd be fun.
I'm Fern. I guess I'm looking forward to be over with my midterms. I have 2 this week.
Yeah, midterm season's starting.
I'm Denisha. This is my first meeting, and I'm excited because my birthday is next week.
What day?
Isn't it this week? Oh, this week. No, whatever. Oh, so that's it.
Yeah. My birthday was on Friday, so
Oh.
a lot of February birthdays. Sorry, say your name again?
Benisha.
Denisha.
I'm Sama. I'm also new. This is my first meeting. I'm a first year. And this coming week, I don't really have much going on, but my sister, she has her final interview for a job. So I'm just really looking forward to hearing that.
Does your sister go here?
No, she goes to Smith College. It's a women's college.
Oh, nice.
She's a senior, so.
Cool. Yeah, I'm from there. Who are you?
Hi.
What are you looking forward to?
What?
Is your foot okay?
Yeah, there's some bandages around it. Got this brace. I just came from Quidditch practice. Got a little janked up, but I'm
You injure
here.
yourself again.
What would be your reaction depending on which answer I give you?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you said yes.
Define injured.
I feel like
You had to bandage your foot.
Yeah, okay. Anyway,
That means you're injured.
yeah, I'm that guy, so I think that's as much as most of y'all already know about me.
Hi, I'm Jay. I'm also a junior. Let's see. So for me, what I'm really looking forward to this week is making some progress on my 310 assignment. So that's going to be fun.
And your what assignment?
My CS 310 assignment.
I'm sorry, gotcha.
I'm Maddie, I'm a sophomore. The thing I'm looking forward to this week is actually my sister is doing some auditions for musical theater college programs, and those are happening this week, so wait to see how it's going.
What is she gonna sing?
I don't actually know. She has a lot of different things prepared for singing and acting. So it's really cool.
One woman show.
I'm Simon. I'm a sophomore, and I am looking forward to. I haven't really thought much about this week, but I do have a midterm. I'm looking for that to be over.
For Ordo?
No, for biochem.
Worse.
Maybe 2.
I'm with Cockett. I heard it was easy.
No, yeah. Oh yeah, I probably last semester would be nice.
Yeah.
I'm Matt. I'm a freshman. I'm not
No, are those flashcards?
Good luck, man.
Good luck. Alright, so, the candidates won't be here for like another 5-10 minutes, so, do you just wanna go around and do task force updates? Kevin, if you wanna start us off.
Sure. So I'm with the Cultural Center Task Force. So our task force is dedicated to establishing a disability center on campus for cultural needs, resources, programming, et cetera, et cetera. Sort of the background to that was meeting with Lee Fickling and talking about like what a center could look like, and like in the next couple of years maybe we can do something temporary where we have like a shared space with another advocacy group, and then maybe in a couple of years, depending on how that goes, we get our own permanent location. So coming off the back of that, the idea was to create a survey that we can send to some 800 students and individuals registered with her office to kind of gauge how many people that have disabilities are interested in such a center and get some more data on that, some fresher and more relevant data. So we drafted that survey and I've sent it to Lee, and she will get back to us hopefully in the next couple of days.
Sorry, I accidentally sent that up to serve instead of the like application.
Oh, yeah.
That was my bad. Sorry, continue.
No, you're good. So hopefully we'll get that back, and depending on our comments, we'll send that out to the 800-ish people. And then from there we'll gain the data, and maybe like when I think of like the long range plan, it'll depend on like the interests of the people in the team, but probably some advocacy with other groups and talking with other other campus student groups, and maybe trying to like put pressure on Duke from like an activism protest side of things, as well as like a data, this is pragmatic, this is ideal side of things.
We have 800 people registered in the SBO.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
That's how it was SDO right now.
Approximately, yes.
Yeah.
They never give an exact number. They don't really like to talk about it that much, but it's about 100, I think, undergrads and graduate students.
Yeah, and I also emailed, there were 4 students in Dr. Q's class last year that wrote the original petition that we worked off of. So I emailed those 4 students, and one of them got back to me about being potentially interested in getting involved in the task force. So we'll see if we can like get more people who have worked on this previously, but if anybody would like to join, please just reach out.
Cameron's not here, but she told me about the ASL club or ASL task force that's going on, because they meet on Tuesdays in the classroom building. If any of you guys want to go in on that meeting, they are trying to advocate or push for more like an ASL curriculum at Duke, and also like teach ASL on the side. And also, Marian could not be here today because she's working on a review essay, or field review essay. But updates from her is that the Disability in the Disciplines Conference website is now live. I'll send that out in the recap email later this week. And if you want to help plan this a 2-day conference, it's like the first 2 days of reading period this year. But it's a pretty packed like star-studded event. Like there's going to be a keynote by Simon's One True Love, Leonard Davis, and like a catered reception, and then a demonstration by Marina Zaplina, who's a visiting artist. She reached out to us last semester, and then different discussions on like neurodiversity and mental health and medical ethics. And speaking of neurodiversity, the Autism Awareness Club is having a film screening tomorrow. I forget the name of the movie, but it will, sorry?
It's autism.
Yeah, Autism in Love. So if any of you guys want to go and watch that, it will be in Griffith Theater in the Vine Center. Autism in Love. Yeah, he's doing a panel discussion or like a Q&A.
Can you say what it is?
I think it's at 7 p.m. in Griffith Theater.
Tomorrow?
Yeah.
Oh.
Trent, any updates on the accessibility map?
Yeah, so Michaela and Caroline went to the meeting yesterday, but
I was also there.
yeah, you're
Nope. I have it like as a perfect tone, but it's like very like
I think one thing that we wanted to do is have some people go and like map out like what are the accessible features in West Union, like where are the accessible restrooms, which entrances have ADOs, things like that. So people are gonna find the time to do that. At some point, like go to West Union and spend some time doing that. Also, I think we're going to have a Google Doc that people will be able to edit throughout the week, or a PDF or something, so we can just continually add features there.
Were we able to get floor plans?
Yes, so the next thing is simplifying the floor plans that we have, because we were able to get like really detailed floor plans, including like all the kitchens on the ground floor that nobody needs to go into. So we're gonna be people are gonna be working on simplifying those also. Yes, and then we're also gonna try and get a scale for the floor plans.
Have they decided how they want to do it, like with Braille, or do they want like a full 3D scale 1-to-1 model kind of thing?
So I think there's definitely, I think, the coding aspect that Manish may have talked about some last week, and trying to basically trying to be able to come up with a metric to say like, okay, this building is this much accessible, it's going to be this easy for you to get around, whereas this building is much less accessible. And that would be done with a kind of some sort of application. And then also I think one other thing that was happening is Manish, who's going to meet with the people from the Innovation Collab to try and get a cost estimate of the tactile map. And like how much, basically what that would entail. And then we're also going to try and reach out to other organizations. I know Dr. Q talked about the neurodiversity club, because basically we want to make sure that we're including a diverse range of people, and including people with all types of disabilities, obviously, in this effort. So yeah, I think that's about it. Any questions?
I'm just gonna say that since the collab is kind of my specialty, I'll go with Manish to get a text him and go with the meeting. Especially since I can use everything for free. So.
Oh, because you work there, or used to?
Used to, but for the stuff this semester, but I still have the keys to everything.
Oh, nice. You love that.
I do too.
Were you guys part of the ASL club and then like came, because I know Simran went to the ASL meeting this past Tuesday and she said that like some people wanted to join DDI. Was that you guys or?
yeah, the event with the NAACP.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we heard about it.
Oh, nice. Can you tell us more about that event? The first thing I wasn't able to go.
Yeah, sure. So Simran like talked about her story and like how that's impacting her here at Duke. And she talked about how DDA is involved in getting the like ASL as part of the curriculum at Duke, because there's no department that would like facilitate the classes or counts it as a foreign language, and it would obviously be more useful to have it count because it's a pretty prominent and prevalent thing in America. So she talked about that. We went through some like exercises on how to say your name, numbers. It's cool. It's very nice. And she basically like told us about DDA as well. So a lot of people were interested in joining. I don't know.
That's great. Yeah. Well, thank you for that reach out. I was wondering like how it went.
It was a really nice event.
And with that, we have our first young trustee candidate. Trey, take it away.
Hello, hi everyone. Thanks for giving me a little bit of your time. I think like one of the funnest things these past few weeks has been an opportunity to like sit with students and listen and kind of talk about some of the ideas of issues that are going on campus. So just want to start by thanking for having me here. For those of y'all who haven't met yet, I'm Trey Walk. I'm a senior here at Duke. I use he, him as pronouns, and I study history, human rights, and urban policy. I originally came to Duke from a small town in South Carolina, and I think that what I want to do today is just talk a little bit about me, who I am, and why I've done the things I've done on campus, and then talk about the position of interest and why I think it's really important, and hopefully have some time for questions. So I think the best way for people to get to know me a little bit better is to learn a little bit about my hero, who was my papa. He was a short man, he had a really big gravelly voice, and he spent his life as a construction worker. And I don't ever really remember a day where he wasn't being of service to someone in our family, one of our neighbors, someone that we cared about. And that's a really big impact on me. We talked about the drive, he, would drink back coffee with me when I was too young for it. We would, I just soaked up every single word he said about the way the world was supposed to be. And I remember when I was graduating high school and getting ready to come to Duke, he said, "Hey Trey, I want you to know we're so proud of you, but also this isn't just about you." And that really stuck with me. The idea that, my Duke education and my time here is meant to be about, something bigger than myself. And, I've tried to take that seriously and making this campus and just a school a better place for other people. So that's a little bit about me. I'll talk some more about my involvements as I go through. I think the really important thing about the young trustee position, the thing that distinguishes them from the other trustees on the board is, one, they're obviously younger. They just graduated and they're in the thick of issues happening on campus. The other piece is they're supposed to be a representative of students, of employees, of faculty members of the Durham community. The hard thing about that charge is that there isn't a single candidate who's running who's going to represent every single Duke experience, which is why I think it's really important to have young trustees really committed to listening and making sure that their perspective and the boardroom is grounded in relationships. And that's what I've tried to do here on this campus. Any change that I've made has happened from the ground up, and I think that that's really important, kind of practice and training skills of listening. Last fall, when Duke announced it, making some pretty drastic cuts to financial aid and healthcare. I worked with Christina Smith, who's TSU president, Luke Farrell, another candidate who's running for trustee, as well as students from Duke Life and People Saving University. We got together in this room and we strategized about how we were going to get Duke to walk back this policy. We reached out to a lot of students and parents who were going to be losing access to STI testing and birth control and flu shots and basic primary care if this policy went through. And because of all those students and families raising their voices, Duke walked back that policy, and over 1,000 students didn't lose their health care, and that's something that's a battle that's ongoing. It really showed me the power of what happens when you are elevating the voices of people who are going to be directly impacted by these things. I volunteered for the past 4 years at a nonprofit in Durham. We work with people experiencing either homelessness or financial insecurity, and it's a one-on-one relationship-based model, and so we work side by side with people that have built some really amazing relationships, and it's really kind of become a home away from home for me. And through that, we kept hearing over and over and over again from people who are applying for jobs at Duke that they weren't being considered for these positions they were well qualified for, and it was because of they had something on their criminal background. Sometimes those mistakes they made when they were in their teenage years or in their early 20s, and it was keeping them from being able to get a job and provide for their families. And so we started working with community organizations, and we did our research. We looked into Duke's hiring policy and North Carolina employment law and ban the box policies across the country. And we went into the room with that, but also these people's lived experiences, and we pushed the administration over the process of several months. And because of that, last fall, Duke banned the box to be a more equitable employer, and it was because we elevated those community voices. And I think, through my time in advocacy with People Saving University, I've just really been able to see the power of two things. I think one, what happens when you are able to craft a vision of what Duke looks like by the people, by different marginalized communities and people who, haven't always, been prioritized by the university. But I think the other piece of it is seeing people from really different backgrounds, be in a room together and really kind of craft this vision of what Duke looks like. To have students in the room who are from, me and they, from Asian Student Alliance and Black Student Alliance and Duke Disability Alliance, and from all these different organizations on campus, really coming together and say, how can we stand up for each other? How can we stick up for each other? And I think that that's something that's really cool and really powerful and meant a lot to me. And so that also shapes my perspective going into the boardroom. I think one last thing that's really important is that it's only a 3-year term, so you really have to be strategic with it. There aren't that many meetings each year, and so serving on the board of directors will look at nonprofit. I spent a lot of time in rooms with Duke administrators, always being the youngest in the room, sometimes being the only person covering a boardroom, sometimes being the only person who has lived experience with an issue. And learning how to communicate why it's urgent that my voice be in there at that moment in time, and also, communicating even though, historically, the communities that I've been fighting for haven't been in there, why it's urgent that we're there at that moment. And that's something that's not easy and it's not a given, but it's a practice that I've learned. And so that, plus the commitment to listening, I think is, what equips me. And I've really just tried to swim my student experience, insisting that it be as best successful, I think, living with those ones. So that's what I'm running, and I'm really excited and happy to take any questions.
Anybody feel free to plug them, sorry, I'm just taking
Yeah,
notes.
of course.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what's your approach to, like, if, as a young trustee, like, what do you think the young trustee role is in dealing with issues that surround disability, and like, what would you bring to the table on those issues? Like, what is your perspective on, like, how to grapple with those things?
For sure. I think there's a lot of different pieces. So I think that, obviously the Board of Trustees oversees resources and also, kind of long-term vision of the university. So I think there's a few different ways for a young trustee to insert in that conversation. I think the, first one is going to be, as we have conversations about, new buildings coming up on campus or as renovations happen on campus, conversations about what it means to insist that all of those be accessible and also that students know that all of those are accessible and providing resources in that direction. I think another important piece, and something I've been talking a lot about, and I'm really excited to talk about, is what it means to think more holistically about our Duke education and just the pedagogy around it. So educating a whole student, thinking about the fact that, students are dealing with mental health challenges. Some students might have, difficulties in a classroom because English isn't their first language. Some students might have a learning disability. Over 20% of Duke students experience grief during their time here. And what does it mean that, how do we build pedagogy around the fact that we can accommodate those different learning needs? I think that that's something that's also going to be really important for young trustees to bring to the board. Curriculum reform is coming up in the next few years, so I think there's a real opportunity to make sure, one, that the curriculum is reflecting different experiences and identities, but also that the pedagogy and professors are also really informed about how to educate students, might have a learning disability or something in that way. I think another really important piece is just, any marginalized community, we aren't just the things that happen to us, we're also, whole human beings, and we need to, be supported in our thriving and health on campus. I think, some of the work y'all have been doing pushing for space for students who have disabilities on campus is really crucial. I think the community building piece is something that, often gets left out of the table when people talk about changes that need to happen, but, it's really important, not just that we respond to things that happen to us, but also that we, have opportunities to be community together and find each other and just be friends with each other. And so I think that's something that's making sure that the folks who are making decisions, in the administrative office, administrative officers who are dealing with these different problems, but also at the Board of Trustees who are making sure that they're reaching out towards and students' experiences. I think another thing, well, not saying sorry. I think that the board has a really important power to do data collection that I don't think that has really been implemented in important ways. So for example, in the early 2000s when Duke commissioned a really big study on women's experiences at Duke, the Women's Center was birthed out of that, the Baldwin program was birthed out of that. But I don't think that Duke has done a really good job of disaggregating and really looking into deep dives of students' experiences from different backgrounds. So for example, when Duke says that it has an international student population, it hasn't picked apart what different experiences students have from different countries and different ethnic groups within those countries. Duke hasn't done a really deep dive into what students who have different different disabilities or learning disabilities, how they experience this campus and the ways in which Duke is and isn't supporting them. I think the board has a really, really powerful opportunity to commission something like that and get real numbers on those student experiences around those issues on campus. And so I think that's something that's really important to bring up too. So yeah.
A lot of ideas.
So I got one question.
Yeah, please.
So obviously we want to make this campus as accessible and equal as it can possibly be. The easy targets are obviously infrastructure, especially when it comes to renovations and new buildings. But one of the things you mentioned was pedagogy, which we agree on. And there are a lot of professors that don't know how to accommodate students with different learning disabilities. So how would you personally go about bringing this up as a topic or targeting this? Because that's a lot harder.
Right, for sure. I think there are kind of two pieces around it. I think that the first thing is really, I think sometimes there's students who get to Duke and don't realize that they have a learning disability until they get here, and I think that's something that's really important. And thinking about what it means. I've had several friends who needed to get tested for those and, had to pay money out of pocket. I think that's something that's like the
Likewise.
university can, put resources behind. But I think the other piece of curriculum reform, they tried to do it a few years ago, faculty fought over it, then it failed. They're gonna go at it again. And so they're basically rebidding everything, all of the curriculum requirements. And I think that, there's real opportunity for the board, the undergraduate education committee specifically is really looking at this. The academic affairs committee with other parts of the university are looking at it too, but the undergrads is coming up in the next few years. And so I think whoever gets elected this year will be able to insert into that conversation about the pedagogy. And the board gets to advise, the academic council, the faculty on what those requirements look like. And I think that, Dean Ashby and Trinity and Dean Melancon and Pratt are having conversations right now about what pedagogy looks like and what the first year experience is. And so I think really inserting that conversation. I think another really strategic thing that a young trustee gets to do, so there are board meetings, and you don't necessarily always get to decide what's on the agenda for those, but you also have dinners and side conversations. And so I think that's a real opportunity to go to other trustees and say, hey, this is a really important thing on campus. Have you heard about it? And if they say no, planting that seed there or sending over articles or doing strategic and slow work of organizing so people. So when you bring it up in the boardroom, everyone's on board and they've been hearing about it. But I think thinking about, the ability to do that is going to be really important strategically for bringing up issues that they are thinking about right now.
Thank you.
Just for the sake of time,
Yeah.
I think that's all we have time for. I think Luke is waiting outside,
Okay.
so he just wants to send it in. But any last thoughts, comments, questions?
Thank you for coming. We know you came last week a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
No, I'm sorry about that. I wanted to make sure that all the candidates had an equal opportunity and I didn't want you to be put at a disadvantage, but everybody hearing you last week and then hearing everyone else today.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See ya.
Oh, sorry, I was just listening to this lady.
Hey everybody,
Come
you ready
in.
for me? Hey, how are you?
Trey's not here, you're welcome to
I
sit,
think I'll
if
do
you
the
wanna
same.
stand, you
I'll
can.
take a seat.
And then, what we didn't say to Trey is there's also a camera here, for anyone who can't make it here.
Oh, sweet.
So if you're okay with being filmed.
Yeah, that's awesome, yeah. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me. My name's Luke Farrell, my pronouns are he, him, his. And I'm a senior here from Hop Hog, New York, studying neuroscience, computer science, and math. Currently on campus, I advise President Price on investment responsibility. I'm super involved in research, and I write a really nerdy Chronicle column. It's called By the Numbers. It's about math and nonsense. So before that, I was chair of SOFC, the Student Organization Financing Committee. I worked a lot with y'all. Actually, it was a really fun time. I was a member of the Cultural Engagement Fund, and I've actually already represented you as a voting member of the Board of Trustees Business and Finance Committee. So a little bit about me. Growing up in New York, my mom, who's this tiny little feisty woman, was a public school teacher. And my poppy, who was this really enormous figure in my life, was the janitor at my high school. They instilled in me an understanding that my education and my time here at Duke should never be taken lightly, right? So as a result, I've fallen in love with this place. I love what I study. I love my research. I love the communities and the friends that I found here. But it is precisely because I love this place so much that I've worked so hard to try to change it for the better. Because I get that Duke is not always at its best, right? I'll give you an example. When I was SOFC chair, I made it my mission to meet with all 300 student groups on campus, every single one. And this group was one of those, actually. And through that effort, I met Jay. And I learned that students with physical disabilities couldn't attend hundreds of events every single year on campus because of their physical disability, right? And so working with you all, we worked to change that, right? I introduced accessibility guidelines, hired ASL interpreters, banned the languages building from any SOFC program event. And for the first time ever, almost every event SOFC put on was physically accessible to everyone. We helped pay for video captioning and all these different things to try to make sure that we were moving towards accessibility, right? And we're not there yet. We're by no means there yet, right? But that was the first and most important step in getting there. When I moved over to the Chronicle and started advocating for policy, I made sure to lean on my relationship with President Price, members of administration, but also student activists, people over at People's State. We learned about the decision to cut financial aid, remove healthcare for over 1,000 students. One of those students who was going to lose their healthcare was one of my really good friends, Elizabeth. Without healthcare, she couldn't afford to go to CAPS or get treatment at student health. That was really scary, right? So we changed that. I wrote a piece in the Chronicle breaking down the budget decision and laying out a very clear plan for how President Price can fix it.
The next day, after calls to President Price and petitioning him, and what was probably one of the most exciting moments of my Duke career, President Price actually changed his mind and overturned the decision. And overnight, hundreds of Duke students, including one of his friends, was reinsured. That was so exciting, right? We actually threw a party the next day. It was like a healthcare party. It was super lame. It's like we can go to the doctor now. It's really sad. When I moved over to the Business and Finance Committee of the Board of Trustees, I made sure that sitting across from CEOs would not deter the conviction of my voice. Surrounded by people like Tim Cook and the CEO of Bain Capital, a motion came before the board to raise tuition. By the time it was my turn to vote, there had been no opposition in the room. So I changed that too. I voted no. And I won't pretend like that wasn't scary, right? Because that was really scary. But what I understood was the gravity of my seat in that room and how to use it. I understood that no student would support an increase in tuition. Definitely not my best friend Tyler, who already works 2 jobs to pay a student loans. And that if I didn't raise my voice in that moment, no one else was going to. The Board of Trustees already has 35 members. So we have to ask ourselves, why does it matter that they added an extra chair for us? We have to make it matter, right? We have to change the conversation. We have to vote when it's unpopular, and that's what I've done. I did it when I voted against an increase in tuition. I did it when I voted to divest from fossil fuels. I did it when I met with every single student group on campus. And I did it when I helped save healthcare for over 1,000 students. It's kind of lame, but this is the kind of work that keeps me up at night, right? Like I can't help but care about all of this stuff. And I want to continue to do this good and just work as your young trustee. And hopefully, with your help, I'll have the chance. Thanks so much. If you have any questions, please. I just also want to hear any thoughts or ideas you guys have.
Yeah. So one of the questions that we asked Trey was, coming into as a young trustee, if you were a young trustee, I mean, what specific issues would you raise with the Board of Trustees? What role do you think a young trustee has regarding accessibility concerns, regarding disability issues on campus? What specifically can the young trustee do around these sorts of issues?
I think there's a lot of room actually for this on the board right now. And from my work on that, I've learned that. So for example, when we're building buildings, right, we're not just meeting standard codes, right, to make sure that they're legal, but are we making sure that they're universally designed for everybody, right? So anyone with a physical disability, or even people's mental health in mind, right? It is absolutely essential that when we're building physical structures on campus, which we are very good at doing and do all the time, are we building them with those people in mind, right? Are we building them with the goal of having everybody included, right? And so a young trustee can be very, very clear and articulate in those things, right? So designs often come before the board, and when these decisions are being made, being a voice for students with accessibility issues, that is absolutely something I am excited to do, right? That is something that I am so ready to do. And I think that's one very concrete way where you can advocate for accessibility. We should not be building things for not every single one of our students now and into the future to be able to access, right? So that's something I care a lot about. I talked to Jay a little about it the other day, but it's something that I care very, very deeply about. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Are there other things that you think the young trustee can do to advocate for accessibility or other questions?
So, what aside from building accessibility, physical accessibility on campus, what else do you think we could do to improve the accessibility of the student experience?
Yes, yeah. So that was gonna be my second thought. So I think that campus culture is almost more prohibitive from community building and things like that for people who have physical and mental disabilities, right? Even with SOFC, right? I think that's a really prime example. If people can't attend events on campus because of their physical disability, or if there's not an ASL interpreter there to make sure that you can experience an event or a speaker, right? We are failing so many students from being able to participate in a rich community, right? Our community is better off when everyone can participate in, right? And so that's something I worked really hard to do as SOFC chair. And I think that the Board of Trustees, while they have less purview over programming and social culture on campus, I think those are things that absolutely that come from the top down, right, too, right? If we are prioritizing these kinds of things when we're thinking about housing in the future, how do we build living learning communities and other things for example, we don't have a disability cultural office kind of downstairs in the BC or anywhere on campus for that matter, right? That's something that students on campus deserve to have, right? That's a prime constituency that student, and I know you guys have advocated a lot for that, for having a center. And I think that's something that's a very clear example of that's a space where you can build community. So that's something that's important to me as well.
How would you personally address the issue of learning disabilities on campus?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question too. Like we should be building so it's physical, like it's our physical buildings on campus accessibility, it's our cultural and our ability to build communities on campus, but it's also academically, right? So I think the way you do that is like having professors build like their materials from scratch, knowing with other students in mind, right? Like if your lectures don't have audio captioning on them, like so many students won't be able to engage with that content. But further still to your point about learning disabilities specifically, I think we need to like destigmatize a lot of them. Like everyone who's at Duke belongs at Duke, right? And learning disability or not, and I think that's really important. And I think educating faculty about that is probably the most important first step in doing that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
What do you think a young trustee, like what role would you play as a young trustee in doing that? Because like that's something that DGA can advocate for and really push for. But I think the young trustee role is really unique, and so I'm curious, like what would that person be able to do?
Yeah. I think it's really hard to necessarily talk about policy on that kind of faculty level, but I'll give you a really good example. When I was fighting for financial aid, I sent my article over to Uzo, Jamal, and Amy Kramer, the current young trustees, and they forwarded that to every member of the board of trustees, and then financial aid got put on the agenda, right? So if you guys are having calls, like if you guys write an article in the Chronicle or pushing for something and administration are not answering, what I can do as a trustee is get that on the agenda for the board, right? Take that article, forward it to every member, talk to every single member of the board and say like, this is a priority for us, and that gets put on the agenda then, right? That's how you change from the top down kind of this cultural thing. And that's why I'm so glad I have like the good relationship with this organization and other organizations on campus where like people feel a level of trust and confidence that if you guys raise an issue, like I'm going to be on the board fighting for it, right? And then if you're calling for a cultural center or calling for learning disabilities education for faculty, right? Like send me your advocacy thoughts, your thoughts on what we need to change, and I will forward those to every member of the board, and that will get put on the agenda, right? I think that's how you can change. That's something that's important. I actually have to run, but if you guys have any other questions, please reach out. I really want to hear from you.
Oh, perfect timing.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
you can see Brian outside too.
I'll send them in. Okay, good. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks. And please, like I said, Facebook, email, anything, please reach out. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Why?
No, I just like never put a face to it. Like I just see his name on emails.
Face to an email.
Yeah, sorry, face to it.
I think it's Pharrell.
For real.
Is it Pharrell?
I think it's Pharrell.
I just always heard Pharrell.
Hi, Brian.
How's it going? Trey and Luke sat here. You're welcome to sit. You're welcome to stand if you feel more comfortable.
I'll sit. I just don't want to take someone's seat.
No, you're
You're
good.
good.
There is a camera for people who can't be here today.
Perfect,
So
yeah.
here they are.
You record all your meetings, don't you?
Yeah.
Hi, Brian. I'm TT. So,
Nice to meet you.
yeah, nice to meet you as well. So take it away.
Oh, should we wait for her to come back? Should we? Oh, we can start without her?
Yeah.
Vote for learning.
Okay, okay.
Start on that.
We're taking notes on everything.
Okay, I just want to make sure to be respectful.
No, thanks for being
Of
inclusive.
course, but hey, thanks for welcoming me here today and taking time. I know you all have better things to do with your agenda than listen to people talk, so I really do appreciate you making time. And of course, here I am, I'm going to talk about myself. I think I'm Brian, by the way, to those I haven't met before, but I think there's 3 important things you should know about any young trustee candidate. Is number 1, who we are, and that's because you have to have faith that we'll make moral and just decisions in the boardroom. I love open and transparent board meetings, but the trustees seem awfully resistant to that, so I'm unsure how quickly that will happen. I think secondly, it's our experiences, and that's the other side of things. When we speak up, will the trustees and administrators listen to what we have to say? And then finally, I'd say it's our vision for Duke, and ideally it should line up with what you believe our institution should represent. I think the quickest way for me to get this across is for me to tell you a short story about my understanding of home and how Duke has really changed that understanding for me. My family's lived all over the place over the last 100 years. We started out in Asia, we fled political persecution there, we ended up in Latin America. political persecution there, so we're clearly very popular. But once we made it into the States, even here, we've lived all over the place, from Hawaii to the Mississippi Delta, from the south side of Chicago to Philly, which is what we call home now. The reason I say this is because for my family, it's always been, hey, what's the next best hope? And that's how we've always proceeded to choose our home. For me, choosing Duke was no different. I remember my wife used to say, hey, it's the next best opportunity for me to succeed in life. That changed pretty quickly. I did a career orientation program called Project Build. It's community service based. You start 8 days before. I remember I showed up in that room for the first time, and all the upper class students were emanating love. And for me to feel like I could belong in a place I also called home was really weird for me. And that continued. I met more and more Duke students. I started an IM soccer team with my Blackwell homemate. We won for the first time last semester. Not very good, but the reason why I share that anecdote is because that was a chance for me to build community in a place I called home. And that was, again, a unique opportunity for me, and that really hit deep. Of course, I started spending my time more and more with this whole idea of community. I took it and ran with it instead of focusing on my studies. So for me, that started with the UU. I worked with the LEC committee for a few years, and while a lot of people use that as an excuse to get drunk on the quad, for me it has always been about how can we really create a community celebration at the end of the year, after a really long year. After 3 years, I can always say it's always a long year. And my work as VP then the subsequent year was working with other campus offices, student groups to try and promote collaboration with the EU and the general graduate and undergraduate student bodies. And then finally, my work this year has always been about promoting spaces that all students can find a sense of home and community, just like I have. You figure out pretty soon, though, that any home is ripe with its flaws. For me, my sophomore year, I began my own version of advocacy, if you want to call it that. I started working at the Women's Center as a GBPI intern, gender violence prevention and intervention. Mainly that's education, also a lot of men's self-education, and then reaching out to people and trying to pull people from communities that normally wouldn't engage that space to try and encourage them on like what feminism truly means and stuff like that. In addition, I still am a public policy major, and it's like always been about civic engagement. Apathy's always been high here. So my sophomore year, I started working with other student leaders here, and then it reached out to community members and other campuses across the country on how can we promote civic engagement, and specifically voting rights, student voting rights, and actual voting registration and turnout. That culminated this past fall. It's always been a team effort, in my opinion. It's not I did this. It was a team effort, and a bunch of student leaders and student groups who worked together to break voting records for the first time since 2012. And so all of this is to say, after 4 years, it's my experiences and my relationships above all else that have informed me as to who I am and will inform me into the board member I hope to become. I'm the only candidate who sat on the board committee for 2 years, and the only candidate who sat on the board committee in its current form. And the reason I bring that up is because it's not just about saying, oh, I believe this about Duke, I want this to happen, but actually making actionable change. If you look at the past Young Trustee candidates and what they've promised versus what has actually happened in the past 2 to 3 years, it's really hard to find that link. So you're really putting a lot of trust in one person to make things happen, and I believe from my experience, I have the requisite experience to actually deliver on what I'm saying. So what am I saying? I think number one, Duke should be putting its people first. If it's students, if it's faculty, if it's staff, and even its administrators don't feel supported by the institution, I think the institution is coming up short. I think secondly, it's about community. Duke is the largest landlord in downtown Durham, the second largest private employer in the state of North Carolina, and the fastest growing regional health system in the Southeast. These are impressive statistics for any one institution, but it's also an immense moral responsibility. Are we using them to empower communities, or are we continuing to use them to break down communities, which has been, in my opinion, what Duke has done in the past. From my project work in Durham, and in addition to my academic work related to the subject, for me, it's always been about, hey, how can we push the institution to engage that responsibly? Finally, they say don't campaign on theoretical things, but I'm campaigning on institutional ethics. And what I mean by that is if I pass Law 304 and everyone here passes their respective degree requirements, we'll all be alumni of Duke. And what that means to me is I want to look back at my alma mater and say, I'm really proud of how it's leading. I'm really proud of how it's listening, not oh my gosh, they did another horrid thing, or oh my gosh, that VP of Student Affairs still doesn't know how to use social media. So at the end of the day, to me, Duke is my home and my peers are my family. And I'm running because I believe in building a better home for the people I love. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Appreciate all you just said. One of the questions that we've been asking everyone is, as a young trustee, what would you do within the boardroom with the relationships that you have with the other trustees? What would you do to raise disability issues, and what sorts of issues would you raise, and how would you go about pursuing them?
Yeah, so I think there's a few ways you can do that. So for number one, for my undergraduate experiences, I always hesitate to take credit for what my organization has done. I know there's been a big concern about the languages building, for example, and how inaccessible it is, and recent changes in how student groups can use that space. I've attended 6 GBMs over the past 2 weeks in the languages building from SOFC funded groups. For me, with DUU, every single event it wasn't even my work. DUU has always been committed to creating spaces for all Duke students, and we've never had any events in places that have been inaccessible. Even the coffee house on the East Campus is accessible. Love the coffee house. So that turns into, hey, how does advocacy work? I don't think it's just about one person changing the minds of a room. I think it's about a sea of voices that really can make things happen. I've just applied to grad school, so I'm knocking on this table a lot, but there's a lot of things writing. I have my interviews next week, and I'm hoping to be here as a Duke student, as a Duke graduate student next year. Why that's important is I'm not leaving Duke. It's going to continue to be my home, and my peers here are going to continue to be the people I'm going to fight for. But that's not just me saying, oh, here's what they told me, and I'm relaying it to you, trustee. It's saying, oh, these are the agenda issues coming up this week. I'll be in Bondi this week. Why don't you swing by and we'll meet and we can discuss what perspectives you think are valuable to certain trustees and certain administrators. In addition to that, it's the other side of things. It shouldn't always be on students and student advocates to step up and take the burden. It should also be on trustees and administrators to actively listen. And I think from my experiences and the relationships I've built over the past 2 years, the relationships I will potentially continue to build, I can be like, hey Lisa, this makes a lot of sense. I'm referring to Lisa Borders, who I think is fantastic. But hey, this makes a lot of sense for you to step in and get involved. I know you're on campus for this talk. Why don't you swing by and talk to my friend who helps who helps do a lot of disability advocacy here on campus. So for me, it's all about understanding the system, how it really clicks, and how you can really use it to the advantage of my peers. So I'd say, well, that's not specific agenda items for disability advocacy. I'd say that it's not my job per se to go in with an agenda, but it's my job to take the agendas of a collection of students and really elevate them.
Any other questions? Anyone else?
Right, I just want to, one thing you said was you had attended some GBMs in the last few weeks in languages.
So they have us running around, of course, to they want to, you're supposed to talk to all these groups, right? So for example, like there's 20 different groups that the young trustee candidates are supposed to run around and talk to today. I've attended a few of those meetings in the language school.
And those are SFC funded, you said?
To my knowledge, DPU, I met with Women in Politics who are at least recognized, if not funded. I'm blanking on the final two, but they're a few.
Right, but the events, those events themselves are not funded by SFC, the GBMs themselves.
I don't know. It's their meeting there. That's what I know.
I thought all meetings were banned. Was that not true?
I think what was banned was if you had an event that received funding specifically for that event.
Oh, so it was funded.
Yeah, so anything that's paid with SOFC money cannot be done in languages building.
But you can still general funding.
Yeah, if it's not funded there.
Unfortunate.
This is all in reference to something Luke helped champion, an initiative that relates to accessibility in the languages building and meetings there, so they're just asking about this.
So I just wanted to clarify.
Okay, yeah, I think there's annual budgeting too. Is that that's run by DSG though, I think, right?
Yeah,
So
I think the thing is like this meeting doesn't have anything paid, like we didn't pay for anything.
I see.
So therefore it doesn't fall under any of the restrictions of the religious, that's been brought up.
Exactly.
Yes.
I see, okay. Yeah,
Can I ask you, so you mentioned something about, or maybe I didn't hear you right, but it was like action, instead of just voicing an opinion to the board, you wanna make it more like something in the form of like actual change, like an agenda that you can actually follow through with.
Yeah.
What do you see in terms of that for accessibility issues on campus?
Yeah, so you're saying like what are specific agenda items I would pursue?
Yeah, like how would you make just like an opinion, like Duke's campus is very inaccessible and in very various ways, and what examples do you think you have for actual change?
Okay, that's a great question. I think it's more important, it's more valuable if it's like more interactive. So I've studied university governance last semester of my history seminar paper on how universities operate, specifically how private research institutions operate in the Cornell model. So like what's an issue that you really believe should be brought up to the board in terms of accessibility?
Well,
It's like something specific.
curriculum accessibility, so like, in the classroom, classroom accessibility.
Yeah, so I'd say like number one, ideally that would be dealt with by administrators in Sally Cornbluth's provost office. But, yeah. Yikes. But so now it comes into the trustees, and the trustees really have the checking power because they're the ones who approve administrators, approve administrative salaries, things like that. So for something like that, I'd say largely the arguments they throw at you is number one, funding. Number one, well, not just funding, but more specifically, they categorize it as like a special initiative funding and how that's limited, which is a BS excuse in my opinion. So how you approach that is number one, you get Tim Walsh on board. He's our treasurer, and you say, Tim, what would this actually look like? What do the numbers look like? And you also have to talk to Tom Trask as well, because that does fall under his bubble and say, hey, like Tom, how do you make this happen? And then you bring in the students with the provost and say, what does that curriculum actually look like? Obviously, given your past interactions with Sally's office, you'd probably lean more on the student side. And then finally, once you have all that packaged together, then you bring it to the relevant committees. So the relevant committees there, I'd say, you could probably get alumni on side, and that would go through external engagement. And you'd also get business and finance involved because that's important. And you get also both education committees on there, undergraduate education and graduate education. The reason there is because you want to be holistic. You don't just want to do it half-assed, pardon my language. I can't think of a better way to say it. But
that's the perfect way.
So yeah, so you bring in both education committees as well, and you get it presented differently to each committee, and then that's when you start rallying trustees. So once you've said you've talked to the appropriate administrators, this is what they think, but this is more important what the students think. Then you start talking to the trustees who have students or have recent graduates of Duke University. They tend to be a little more human than the people who graduated in the 70s and had no other Duke ties but showing up for basketball games every single once in a while. So that's who you target. And then in addition to that, then you start targeting people who work on equity issues in the workplace. I mentioned Lisa Porter. She's the new CEO of Time's Up, which tackles gender discrimination in the workplace, and also has a legal fund associated with that. You target people like Lisa, you target people like Jack Boyd, who's done a lot of LGBTQIA plus advocacy, and then that's how you bring them into the picture. And then the trustees, I think to my knowledge in the past 8 or 9 years have always voted on issues unanimously. They don't like to say like, oh, it was 5-4 this decision or something. It's like that's the Supreme Court or like whatever, however many. It's like they want to show solidarity with each other in the future of the institution. And so what I'm saying here is if you can get enough voices and you can show you've done the groundwork, and I have experience with DSG, I have experience with DUU, and I'm going to be here next year, then you can bring it to the trustees, and once you get that cacophony of voices together, then you can really make change happen, and because you've convinced enough people that it's a movement, and then in the boardroom, once the movement happens, you can they really pick up on things quickly if they believe it's right and you can rationalize it. So they'll ask you for the numbers, they'll ask you for that, but you bring in the humanity and you tie in the people, because they're people at the end of the day. They're not as distant as you think they are. And so I think that's how I would approach that specific issue.
Well, in the interest of time, we're gonna have to say thank you.
Okay, of course, yeah.
For coming in and talking with us.
Thank you so much for making time for me. And if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email or a message or anything.
Cool.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
So much. Also, if you see Archana outside, please feel free to send her in.
Of course, yeah.
Also guys, I know if we're running out of time, but I really ask you to like stay a couple more minutes longer if you can. I know midterm season starting, but we really should give each candidate like an equal opportunity and chance, and it's just one of us.
You're welcome to sit here, that's where all the other candidates sit. You're also welcome to stand if you like. And we have a camera here for people who can't make it in person, if you're okay with doing so.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Thanks for having me. Okay. Hi guys, my name is Archana Alawat. I'm a senior from Central New Jersey, and I'm studying computer science and political science. I'm really excited to be running for Young Trustee. So I'm running because my experience at Duke has been really empowering and transformative, and that's really because of the communities that I've been a part of, and especially my mentors who have taught me to really think critically about our communities and kind of seek to make them stronger and also more inclusive. So for the past couple of years, I've been working with the Office of Undergraduate Education to establish and expand the Duke Conversations program. We're a program that hosts student-faculty dinners in professors' homes every week. And so every year, we host around 70 dinners that attract around 500 unique Duke students. And so through this experience, I really developed a love of facilitating conversations, and especially for bringing together a cross-section of the Duke community in one place where we could really have productive dialogue, especially amongst students who don't really meet each other in their daily Duke lives. Because the organization is run out of the Office of Undergrad Education, I've become really comfortable and confident working with administrators and kind of navigating that institutional space and also being able to assert myself and kind of promote my own ideas. And so as an example of this, we have expanded beyond student-faculty dinners to student trustee and like student administrator dinners. So typically every semester, Duke Conversations hosts dinners with trustees, a couple of trustees, as well as President Price, and in the past, like previous former President Brabham. And last semester, we hosted some conversations with a current Duke trustee who is she's the head of the task force to determine what will Duke's housing look like in the future. And we brought together a lot of students from Greek life, from SLGs, as well as independents, who then were able to talk about their lived experiences with each other, but then also talk very candidly with the trustee. And so this is a really broad perspective that I would hope to bring to the board in terms of just understanding a wide variety of Duke students' issues and passions on campus, as well as understanding the value of really increasing transparency between the board and students and ensuring that trustees are actually grounding their decisions in students' actual experiences and not kind of just from what they hear from maybe the Chronicle or the very few students who get to sit on the board. I think this is a really important thing to bring to the board. In addition to Duke Conversations, I've been really involved with promoting women in tech and also diversity and inclusivity within a lot of business and tech spaces on campus. I've been involved with business-oriented women for the past couple of years, though, and I initially joined because I was really seeking this community of women and community of mentors to kind of help me navigate Duke life. And I quickly realized that the BOE environment was pretty homogenous and was not very inclusive to a lot of different types of women, especially low-income women, first-generation women, as well as women of color. And so when I was on the exec board last year, I wanted to go beyond my role as technology chair to actually do something about my frustration. And I ended up creating the BOE D&I chair position on the exec board. And through that, we facilitated a lot of conversations between BOE community members, actually bringing to the forefront issues of intersectionality and trying to understand how we can better support all types of women and not just a subsection of women. And this overall experience solidified my belief in integrating D&I work directly into our institutions and not having it be like an afterthought or a kind of tacked on agenda item. And I think this is a really important and often swept aside perspective to bring to the board, especially considering kind of Duke's larger strategic commitments. Duke is trying to commit more into financial aid, although slowly, but I also think it's not enough to just get more people in the door. We also have to ensure that we're supporting all types of students and ensuring that students have access to all facilities, all academic spaces, social spaces, as well as professional spaces on campus and beyond. And so I think that means on the board really elevating those conversations and kind of nudging trustees in the direction of using data and understanding like what people are actually in at these different spaces on campus and who is excluded and why is that. and then investing more in programs like the Duke Technology Scholars Program or the Spire program, or in kind of specialized programs in the Career Center. And I think this is a perspective that is kind of missing oftentimes from board discussions. Overall, when I think about my Duke experience, I kind of think of it as me really learning how to enact change from that one-on-one level where you're a mentor or you're a TA and kind of trying to create an accessible environment, to then understanding like how do you embed those values into an institution, and how do you use institutional policies and structures to enact change. And I've really tried to ground my decisions and the ways that I've looked at my communities in actual community members and students' experiences, and that's something that I really hope to bring to the board and kind of create is the main motivation for me running for Young Trustee.
Well, thank you for saying all that. One question that we have been asking all of the candidates is, what are the issues around disability that you identify that you think a young trustee can bring to bear and can focus on? And sort of what are the ways that you would maybe pursue those issues or trying to bring about change on them?
Yeah. So I think a couple of issues that are kind of enmeshed within this like broader issue of the fact that disability, I feel like it's not a very commonly talked about topic at Duke, both like amongst students as well as, and even more so amongst administrators. And so I think because it's not very talked about, like we don't actually end up kind of confronting the issues of like what are the physical spaces that are inaccessible to people, but then also going beyond that, like what are specific processes or events that people are not able to actually go to. So as an example, I guess, I was kind of looking at the blog that Duke Disability Alliance has, and I was reading a blog post about how like the whole the Duke UNC football game, like someone was not able, or like was having a very like uncomfortable experience there because the whole process of like getting into a game and being a Duke student was not like made accessible at the very outset. So I think in terms of what a young trustee can do, I think one, in terms of when Duke is trying to expand and create more infrastructure and facilities, just like putting at the kind of top of the agenda or like some as an institutional priority to ensure that it's an accessible building and it has like accessible kind of facilities within it. And then going beyond that, kind of nudging the conversation forward about like how do we provide more. How do we like hire more people in CAPS and in the Career Center who actually understand the kind of more nuanced issues and like the background of students with disabilities, because often these are really crucial resources on campus. And these are just two examples, like CAPS and the Career Center. They're like really crucial resources on campus, but often the people involved have experience in only a kind of one type of Duke students experience, and so they're not as useful for all Duke students. I think that's really important. So just nudging forward understanding that, kind of communicating to trustees that it should be an institutional priority to ensure all students can access both like physical facilities, but then also resources that we want all students to be able to access, and then kind of bringing up the issues of accessibility and ensuring we're building that in.
Yeah, I think we had time for one question.
I won't ask because I already asked. Okay. So you're just in that same example of like, CAPS counselors or Career Center counselors are really geared to only one particular student experience. So how do you envision changing that? Or like, how do you think that you, as a young trustee, could help implement that change in like maybe the counselors themselves? I'm not really familiar.
I think that one thing that's key is for any young trustee to recognize that like my experience is not singular and it's not like all encompassing, and because
Are you guys almost finished up?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay.
Nice.
Yes.
Because like my experience is not all encompassing, I have to realize that I need to actually like talk to students and kind of understand like what are the experiences of people with disabilities, or like any other like student group, and then elevate those up to the board. So I think like the way that I guess in this example of like CAPS counselors, I would, as a young trustee, like reach out to like Duke Disability Alliance and hopefully try to kind of like host a conversation like this where it's like a lot of people in one room or like virtually, I guess, and then me trying to ask questions of like what do you think, like what is currently not working specifically, and what would you like to see, what do you think would be most effective, and then basing what I talk about on the board on those like very real student experiences, I think is crucial in having that change happen.
Well, thank you. We know you're super busy and appreciate you waiting and like understand the disturbance and stuff.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about it probably and then we'll get feedback to everyone next day or so.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys so much for hanging around a little bit longer. Ideally, we would have talked about
Can people stay afterwards to talk for 5 or 10 minutes?
I can hear.
Just like right outside somewhere?
Yeah.
Because I think like the vote's in like 2 or 3 days, so we need to get a decision down.
Yeah.
Cool.
Everyone who's there, feel free to message me if you have any thoughts or comments I'm sure that you can better. We wait.